1898. Deep in the Missouri Ozarks, a dark tale whispered through the hollows. The shocking story of the Vancroft sisters spread quietly, a secret spoken only behind closed doors. They had become entangled in their father's twisted desires. A farmhouse perched on a lonely rise, its windows always shuttered. A man of standing, who quietly purchased sedatives and lime in unusual quantities. 2 daughters vanished from the church ledger, their names neatly erased. Then, decades later, a hidden note emerged. The ink faded, but the message undeniable. This is how a family's hidden horrors finally clawed through years of silence. But if the law arrived too late, and the man had already passed from this world, could the truth itself serve as punishment? Observe, reflect, and share your thoughts. Let us know your town and local time. Witness how far this story travels. If unearthing hidden truths matters to you, subscribe and stand with us. The record does not start with a shout, but with the delicate scratch of a pen. Within the fraying pages of an 1898 church ledger, 2 names had been struck through in thick black ink: Lillian and Clara Vancroft. In the margin, a careful hand had inscribed a brief, damning comment. Explained nothing of their actions, only their existence. The words read, "Conduct unworthy of daughters." For years, that was the sole official acknowledgement. The sisters vanished from public life, their roles in the town erased. Yet in a community where every family was known, silence always finds its voice. It emerged in the memories of Rebecca Hensley, a devoted Sunday school teacher. She recalled the girls' pale faces, the way they leaned close together, as if shielding one another from an unseen storm. Their absences from class became frequent, always justified by their father, Samuel Vancroft, a respected landowner with a firm grip and a Sunday smile that never reached his eyes. Rebecca noted that the girls were never among peers their own age. They moved always in his shadow, at the general store, in the wagon, on the farm. Whispers began to circulate, the kind of talk that drifts over fences and fills quiet kitchens. Initially dismissed as idle gossip, the rumors suggested an unnatural closeness to their father. But Samuel Vancroft was a man of influence. To accuse him was to risk his subtle wrath. So the whispers faded, but the watchful eyes did not. And the murmurs might have died completely if not for what came next. One spring, Lillian Vancroft, the elder sister, gave birth to a child. No husband, no suitor known to the town. When the infant was taken for baptism, the registry was completed in near silence. Under the section for the father's name, the pen did not move. The space remained blank. Suddenly, the old rumors hardened into an unbearable truth. The erased names, the frightened eyes of the girl, the fatherless infant, all formed a shadow that darkened the white farmhouse at the edge of the town. It wasn't merely unusual behavior. It was a darkness concealed behind locked doors, a secret dominated by a father's watchful eyes. The Vancroft farmhouse sat isolated from the neighboring homesteads, set back on a gentle rise that seemed to repel visitors. After the first murmurs of Lillian's child began circulating, the house seemed to withdraw further into itself. The windows were often shuttered, the porch swing unmoved for weeks at a time. To outsiders, it appeared to be a quiet family keeping to themselves. But within, silence was orchestrated with precision. The evidence of this control was not in what could be seen, but in the meticulous records hidden away in the town ledgers. At the general store, Samuel Vancroft's ledger told a story of unusual purchases. Tonics and sedatives were bought in quantities far beyond ordinary domestic use, alongside bags of quicklime in amounts no farmer would need. Around the same period, a neighbor living downwind remembered a pungent chemical odor rising from the farm, strongest near the root cellar. At the time, he gave it little thought. In the Ozarks, odd smells were commonplace, often dismissed. Yet the harsh winter of 1898 intensified the Vancroft family's seclusion. Snow arrived early and lingered, covering the hills in white, sealing the farm in a chilling isolation. During the spring planting season, a young farmhand noticed Margaret, the younger sister, staring at him from an upstairs window. One afternoon, he approached the side door to fetch water, only to find it locked. Samuel explained that Margaret was ill and needed her rest undisturbed. Yet the farmhand saw the key turn from the outside, hinting at a surveillance more controlling than protective. Around this same season, school records revealed that Lillian, once a lively teenager, suddenly vanished from class rosters. One day she appeared, the next she was gone, a quiet erasure of her presence, a sign of lives systematically constrained. Perhaps the most unnerving accounts came decades later from letters left behind by a visiting cousin. She described the Vancroft house as a place of uneasy quiet, a tension that seemed almost alive. Strange nocturnal sounds were reported, a low, sorrowful humming emanating from behind closed doors. Upstairs doors sometimes refused to open despite obvious presence on the other side. Gradually, the whisper of gossip hardened into a tangible, unsettling pattern. Sedatives, lime, locked rooms, disappearing daughters. This was no ordinary household in mourning or illness. It was a prison, its walls constructed not from bricks but from fear and submission. The lives of the Vancroft sisters appeared meticulously manipulated, their individuality crushed beneath the weight of a father's perverse command. While whispers in the town were one form of suspicion, the secrets kept in private, those recorded in hidden diaries or letters, spoke a truth far darker. One such revelation came from Sarah Delling, the town midwife. Known for her discretion and care, she had delivered countless children across the county. Decades later, a folded page was discovered in her old medical texts. The notes described a secret birth at the Vancroft farm. Lillian was the mother, but the midwife's focus was on Samuel, the father figure whose presence was unnervingly close. He was no anxious grandfather. He stood watchful, almost like a warden. The midwife's observation of the infant was chilling, a frail, silent baby whose eyes betrayed a wrongness beyond mere illness. Fear held her silent. She feared Samuel's cold, hidden wrath and the judgment of the church and town. Later, in whispered conversations, she admitted believing that Samuel himself had fathered the child, yet voicing this would have invited ruin. Thus, her record remained hidden, a secret maintained for decades. It would take another generation to uncover the next shocking piece of evidence. A small wooden box, discovered by chance, containing a letter never sent. Written by Margaret, the younger sister, it was addressed to a distant confidant, a desperate cry frozen in time. Her youthful handwriting revealed a confession that confirmed the town's darkest suspicions. The words, simple yet devastating, read, "Papa says we are his brides. God forgive us." This was direct testimony from within the walls of the shuttered farmhouse, an irrefutable declaration of the horror inside. Yet no legal action was taken. The letter surfaced too late, the whispers too faint. Samuel Vancroft continued life in the town as a respected man, shielded by fear, silence, and reputation. Silence can endure for a lifetime, but it rarely survives the grave. Nearly 20 years passed, and the year was 1917. The world was engulfed in war, and the shadows of the Ozark hills seemed smaller than ever. Yet, inside the Vancroft farmhouse, the darkness had deepened. Lillian, now gaunt and broken by illness and grief, became the focus of a visiting nurse, Clara Fielding. Known for her sharp perception and compassion, Clara listened closely. In the dim light of Lillian's sick room, the confession emerged, a word held for decades, finally released in a trembling whisper. He claimed us both, and the children were his. Clara, absorbing the weight of the word children in plural, began to trace the threads of history, slowly uncovering a pattern of unacknowledged infant deaths and hidden tragedies. Lara's investigation led her through dusty census records, burial logs, and old town archives. The discoveries were harrowing. Records indicated at least 2 infant deaths on the Vancroft property, children whose lives had barely begun before being erased from any formal acknowledgement. In the family cemetery, small, unmarked stones bore a single stark inscription: "Baby." No surname, no dates, erased before ever truly recognized. Where the law might have failed, Clara's voice became the catalyst for reckoning. She spoke to town elders, veterans, and community members who had long suspected something unspeakable. The dormant whispers grew into a collective acknowledgement. The community's private suspicions turned into public indignation. At last, attention was forced toward Samuel Vancroft, a man whose reputation had protected him for decades. Yet justice, when delayed, often falters. Before the sheriff could act, Samuel succumbed to a sudden stroke, dying quietly in his own bed. For a fleeting moment, it seemed he had evaded the consequences of his actions, his secrets buried with him. But the truth, once released, has a life independent of human law. Though Samuel had passed, the story of his deeds refused to die. The whispers had transformed into declarations, and memory became the instrument of judgment. His life, his property, and his name were forever altered in the collective consciousness of the town. Clara discovered additional evidence among Lillian's personal effects, sketches and writings that depicted the oppressive atmosphere of the household. Drawings of locked doors, shadowed figures, and distant cradles offered a haunting, silent record of captivity. The community received these works as proof, an undeniable testament to a life constrained and controlled. The church, where the original silence had begun, became the venue for the final acknowledgement. The elders convened to revisit the ledger of 1898. Beside Lillian and Margaret's erased names, the clerks inscribed a formal condemnation of their father, stricken for abomination. The man who had cloaked himself in faith and respectability was now exposed. His sin, once hidden, was named for eternity. In the town, a man's name bore his legacy. Samuel's became a warning. The land he once owned was sold at a fraction of its worth, as though the soil itself bore the stain of his deeds. His grave remained unmarked, a deliberate act of communal erasure. Though human courts had failed, the justice of memory prevailed. The daughters, once shrouded in rumor and suspicion, were restored in history as victims of unimaginable abuse. Generations to come would remember them not for scandal, but for survival. Samuel's name lingered as a cautionary tale, whispered on cold nights to remind the living that even when the law falters, truth possesses its own inexorable power. The hills of the Ozarks had long concealed dark secrets, but the land remembers. Even in the silence, the echoes of hidden lives demand to be heard. After his death, as the few remaining belongings were cleared from the Vancroft farmhouse, one final piece of testimony emerged. It was a small, worn wooden box containing a collection of Lillian's sketches, drawings made over the years on scraps of paper, envelopes, and ledger margins. There were no written explanations, yet the images spoke with a haunting clarity that words alone could never convey. The drawings showed doors barred with heavy locks, shadowed figures with faceless heads looming over empty rooms, and the most heartrending of all, a solitary cradle, always depicted from afar, without a mother nearby, as though the artist herself was forbidden to approach. These simple, silent images became undeniable proof of a life lived under captivity. The box passed quietly from hand to hand, solidifying the town's judgment. The first official act of acknowledgement came from the very place where the silence had begun, the church. The elders gathered, solemn and resolute, to reopen the ledger from 1898. Beside the names of Lillian and Margaret, previously struck out and erased from memory, the clerk now added a new entry for their father. Next to Samuel Vancroft's name, a clear and final correction was inscribed, stricken for abomination. The man who had hidden behind faith and social standing was publicly condemned. His wrongdoing, once invisible, was now named for all time. In that town, a man's name carried his legacy, and Samuel's became a warning. Conversations about him were now marked by shame and revulsion. His property, formerly a symbol of power, was sold for a fraction of its value, as if the soil itself bore the stain of his deeds. When the community marked his final resting place, they chose erasure over memorial. No headstone, no name, just a silent plot of earth, slowly returning to nature, leaving the man's presence unrecorded. Though human courts had never imposed punishment, the justice of memory proved absolute and enduring. Samuel Vancroft's reputation lay in ruins, while the daughters, once whispered about as sinners, were reclaimed in history as victims of an unimaginable torment. Generations would remember them not for scandal, but for survival and resilience. His name was not buried with him. It was preserved as a cautionary tale, recounted on cold nights, reminding all that even when the law is delayed and justice seems absent, truth will eventually speak. The hills of the Ozarks had hidden his secret for decades, but the land remembers, and so does history.